David Griscom here with this week's Griscom stream. Hope you're doing well wherever you are. It's hot. It's hot as hell here. It's about 107 degrees outside today. And this might be the last stream I do from this home studio, moving places, which is why I've been sort of in and out the past couple of weeks, hopefully finishing up this weekend. But apologies if I'm still a little scattered from all that. Hopefully next week will be a little bit more settled. Yeah, and if you missed it, we had a really great show on Tuesday. We had Cale Brooks on to break down his critique of not just degross politics, but the economics behind it. It's always a really great pleasure to hang out with Cale. He's fun and a smart guy. He does a lot of the really tedious work and reading, which is always a very nice thing to have in a guest. And also, if you missed it, if you're not a patron, you can sign up at patreon.com/leftreckoning. We had a banger of a post game. Matt and I both took down two of our least favorite right-wing figures. I spent some time on none other than the Ben Shapiro, who says some really stupid ass things about Marx. And look, of course, he's going to say, he's not going to be praising Marx or anything like that, but he said some really ignorant and just flat out wrong stuff about Marx's theory of history. So we took a little bit of time to break that down, what Marx's theory of history actually is, what Marxism claims, and push back against this wild argument that Ben Shapiro was making. Matt took on famous TikTok and podcast finance huckster, PBD. I always get his name wrong. But who was flipping out against the UPS drivers because they're getting paid for the work, which I guess is some kind of sin for this rise and grind hustle culture freak stuff. So we spent some time not only debunking his argument, but also looking into his past and what seems to be a very clear MLM going on where he has made all of his money. And this weekend for patrons, we are going to be doing a news roundup. Matt already has a couple stories for us. So keep your eye out for that Sunday afternoon, patreon.com/leftreckoning to support us, support the show, and help keep us growing. A couple other things hopefully happening in the next couple of weeks to months. But I'll wait till we have more firm stuff to announce all those. But yeah, these are a little bit more of a casual stream. So I'm happy to sort of take questions from y'all, talk about a few different subjects, whatever is sort of on y'all's mind. Just feel free to throw those questions. We do enjoy super chats to help keep this channel going. But if you put something in the chat, I will try to read it, even if it's not a super chat. But enough of intro, folks. Let's go. Good to hear from all of y'all. Matthew wants book suggestions for learning about why the Soviet Union collapsed. Well, I think on that, I think generally doing general history to sort of learn the kind of main arguments, right? The kind of conventional arguments is a good place to start versus maybe if you're not familiar, for example, diving into something that's a little bit more technical or has a very particular argument to make is good sometimes, I think, to get a little base. I do think that reading some of the work of Leo Panitch, if you send me an email, I'm forgetting some of the titles that I'm thinking about off the top of my head. But a lot of Leo Panitch's work on this can be really good and helpful. Sort of look at the victory of global capitalism in the 21st century, as well as sort of what the structural things that went into the Soviet Union's kind of excuse me, democratic collapse, right? Because what happened with the Soviet Union, it's a really incredible moment in human history, right? The Soviet Revolution was one of the great guiding stars of socialist and Marxist movements throughout history. And what ends up happening is you take this highly politicized society, right, like post-revolution, and you basically try to depoliticize it. And what that meant was that maybe you had some more security for the government, but you weren't doing that socialist work of like trying to embolden everyday people to rule. I think that you can have like a kind of very simplistic view of the Soviet Union. You have to look at it as a bunch of different moving parts, right? Because a lot of things that happened in the Soviet Union were incredibly beneficial for working people and people in general, right? Life expectancy, access to education, things like that that were not available to people, for example, at the beginning under the Russian Empire. But there's just no doubt about it that, especially when it had collapsed at the end, um, that like the fundamental access to democracy and to ruling in that society of everyday people had been severely limited. So I think if you want to look at for more of a political argument, I highly suggest checking out the work of Leo Panich in general, to see what that kind of lack of democracy creates. Good to hear from you, Kate. Hope you're doing well, and we're all looking out for you. Thinking of you. Let's see. We got James in here who says, um, Friday morning here in Sydney, Australia. Can we get some barbecue tips? Man, I'll tell you, one of the easiest things, if you want to really get started, if you can cook anything long today, if you can get to the grocery store, I mean, the quickest things to do, if you have some time, my favorite thing to do is what I call poor man's brisket, which is where you get a chuck roast. Try to get a really fatty piece of chuck roast. I don't know if they call it something different there. Um, but if you take a chuck roast, you put some mustard as a binder, a little salt and pepper, maybe a little garlic powder if you'd like, and you put that on the smoker for, a good 6, 7, 8 hours. Get it around to 200 Fahrenheit. Sorry, I don't know the Celsius. Um, you have a pretty damn good meal. But the easiest and fastest and in a lot of people's opinions, like the best thing that I make, man, is chicken thighs. Chicken thighs take no time at all. 45 minutes. Put another little binder on there. You could use hot sauce, you could use mustard, whatever. The smoke's going to cook it all that off. It's really just to get the crust that you want on it. I like to go really spicy when I make chicken thighs. Put a little pecan or a little oak in your smoker. If you're using like a gas grill, put some wood chips in a thing of water, so they soak up a lot of water, and you can actually put them, if they're large enough, you can put them on the grill so that it like they smoke and smolder a little bit, so you get some smoke flavor, even if you have a gas grill, not a real one. Yeah, but let me know what you're cooking. The Australians love barbecue from what I've gathered, just even on YouTube, like every other barbecue recipe or tutorial is in Aussie, so y'all know your stuff. Thanks, Adam. Adam says, "I left his best. How's the weather? Weather is hot as hell." Um, it's also, I'm getting very nervous about my electric bill this month because it looks like ERCOT is having some pretty big failures, which means that the price of electricity goes up, um, even if the system doesn't collapse. So not looking too good here, but I'm doing well. And a great interview with the degrowther debunker. Yeah, Kale's great. I mean, Kale Brooks, if you don't know his work over at the Jackman Show, he'd be on it frequently. He was the lead producer there. He's a good friend, smart guy, has been writing good stuff in Damage Magazine, which is another thing y'all should be checking out if you haven't. My good friend over here in Australia says, on the grind with my standing desk and treadmill ready to say Giga Maggies. Let us hear some hype in the stream for King Griscom. Thanks so much for the super chat, friend. Hope you're doing well over there. Oh, I haven't heard about Twitter's run-ins with the Australian government. Let me know about that. All right, let's see. Um, Kizezhenik, I hope I'm saying right, says, what are the potential ramifications of the Niger coup on the rest of Africa? Any potential for a growth and decolonization? I mean, it's really early to tell. I mean, you have to be a little careful with kind of, you know, military takeovers of the government, before you start celebrating too quickly. But no, I mean, there's been a wave of coups and um, shifts in power in that area around Niger, particularly. I think it'd be really great. And we've been trying to reach out to him, trying to see if we could schedule to get Milton Alamati on to give an in-depth take on that. And I think he'd be somebody who'd be really helpful. And if anything, these kind of reminders for people about how bad France is a very good thing. But while y'all are getting some more questions in there, let's do a segment that we've been doing now for the past 3 weeks, which is checking in on our good friend Kramer, Jim Kramer, somebody who, again, got the financial crisis wrong, has been giving people horrible financial advice, and more importantly, is a very, very ardent enemy of organized labor, despite himself once being a member of a Trotskyist organization, the Spartacists, which is always a very funny fact about him. But we've been playing these every week, and he keeps on giving us more gold. So let's hear Kramer talking about what's going on with the UAW.
Trucks and the incredible Facebook performance by Shawn Fain yesterday, where he just called the Stellantis offer trash. We're going to have, right when we start talking about the presidential election, I think the biggest strike our country has had in years, which is the UAW.
You think that's going to happen?
Yeah.
You don't think Gene Sperling can talk both sides off of ledges?
No, Gino can't do it because this guy who runs the UAW reminds me of Earl Browder. I mean, he's like a longshoreman union. The stevedores.
Well, today's the 100th day of the writers on strike.
Right.
And that rhetoric isn't cooling down after Friday's apparently failed meeting.
No, I mean, look, these things matter tremendously. The auto strike is going to, I have Dana on tonight.
When?
Not
was that
Zool. I don't have. I have Zool
September
on tomorrow.
14th
Dana
is the
tonight.
contract.
September 14th. But the fellow who's running it is just going around telling. Like, if you walked in there, he would tell you. I mean, he says horrible things. He's talking about a kleptocracy. That the people who own these stocks are just bad people. I mean, Americans own these. I mean, it's like it's in your 401k.
Yeah, I haven't been focused.
Oh, you've got to focus on this guy.
All right.
This guy is just. He was made for our show.
We should bring him on?
Oh, I want him on. Shawn Fain, I think he should be like a co-host. He is so electric. He is third rail. He is using rhetoric that Elizabeth Warren would say, keep your mouth shut.
Well, I mean, I don't know if that's a good litmus test there. I think there's a lot of good rhetoric out there that Elizabeth Warren would be afraid of making. Well, look, anything that makes Jim Kramer sweat is a good thing. And yeah, kleptocracy is the right word. I mean, what Shawn Fain has been saying about these contracts that are being presented to them being trash, about these about the fact that the value that the laborers at the UAW are creating is everything. And the idea that these kind of fat cats and these shareholders deserve to be taking more and more out of the paychecks, out of the off the plate of these workers, that time is done. And that's what Shawn Fain is saying. And it's good that he's saying it in the kind of rhetoric that he is, because for far too long, certainly Democratic Party politicians, but even leaders in organized labor have been afraid to sort of speak in this way. And it's a very good thing to hear Shawn Fain talking so clearly about these things. And it's a great thing when you get to see Jim Kramer sweat a little bit. But anyways, let's get back to the chat a little bit. I have one more story I'm going to get to later, but these are always a little bit more fun when they're more interactive. So feel free to throw in some questions or even just a topic that you might want to hear we chat about for a little bit. Mario, how are you doing? Mario says, have you ever read or considered getting somebody like John Bellamy Foster on the show to discuss their Marxist version of degrowth instead of constantly just talking about the neoliberal one? Well, yes, I have read, for example, the most recent monthly review. I have shared and talked about the criticisms of it. We've shared Matt Huber's criticisms of it. And look, I think it's sad to see, for example, a publication like Monthly Review putting out these kind of things. I mean, I've always respected to a certain extent John Bellamy Foster's work, and it's sad to see them pushing this kind of anti-Marxist politics. I mean, maybe we could have John Bellamy Foster on. I think he's very different than a lot of the trendy degrowthers. There was a couple pieces in that review that were fairly decent, particularly the critical ones, in that most recent edition of Monthly Review. But yes, I'm very familiar with degrowth. That's why I don't like it. Moore's Dore says, any plans to bring Naomi Klein on for a deep dive into her new book, Doppelganger? I mean, we would love to have Naomi on. I mean, if you got an email for us or a connection, we'd love to take advantage of that. I'm looking forward. It'll be interesting to read the new book. I've been hearing a lot about it. Daniel says, did you see Jimmy Dore verbally harass Marianne Williamson? Gee, I wonder why he didn't use the kids' gloves he used on RFK. I have to admit, I did not see Marianne Williamson and Jimmy Dore. It does not surprise me at all, because as we've seen across the board, when it comes to Jimmy Dore and even supporting candidates in the Democratic Party primary, which I guess I thought we weren't supposed to do anymore, right? But RFK is an exception for some reason. Well, you know why Jimmy likes RFK. But Marianne Williamson, somebody who is vocally supportive of a lot of these progressive things that Jimmy says the Democratic Party and AOC and Bernie Sanders have turned their backs on. Yeah, it's pretty amazing to see him come at them, especially now that he's attacking somebody like Cornel West, who's running not inside of the Democratic Party or the Democratic machine. Yes, and Ben, how's it going, brother? He did say Earl Browder, which is a real good throwback. I mean, that's the thing that's really great about these Jim Cramer freakouts, is that he gives you a little bit of a history lesson with his name drops in here. Well, we have a very hot question here. I will do my best to answer it. Why have the 21st century Democratic Socialist parties in the Anglo-Atlanticist sphere, well as the U.S. Democrats, turn themselves into predatory neoliberals facilitating tricksters? Well, I will say that I mean, this is one of the fundamental realities of politics, is that regardless of even like the social democratic parties, let alone like the center left parties, there's been a massive evaporation in party structure, particularly in Europe, where it was stronger than it ever was in the United States. And what you ended up happening is a complete retreat of politics from the economy. Right? You've seen this very, very clearly, like in the American context. For example, look at the IRA. Right? IRA, Joe Biden's hallmark environmental policy. Well, what is it? Is it building out state investment? Is it building out a new train system? Is it building out nuclear power and renewable energy across the country, done by the government for the people? No, it's a bunch of tax credits and carrots and sticks to hope that capitalists and the wealthy make the kind of investments in society that we would like them to make. Right? That is something that comes, like, regardless of even talking about doing class war politics or class struggle politics. I mean, that just shows that these parties have weakened their ability to actually influence the economy, even when they want to get involved. Look at the similar kind of things when it came to oil production in the United States, when we were facing this oil crisis just a year and a half ago, right? Right? They were just basically begging the oil companies to increase production. When gas prices were skyrocketing, right? This kind of thing that happens when you have no ability effectively to interact with capital or the economy in a direct way. But all this comes from like a general retreat of the social democratic parties, of labor, of the traditional parties of the left in France, like the Socialist Party, and certainly in the United States with the Democrats. This kind of end of history politics, which left most people feeling, rightfully so, that the government can't really do very much for you. Politics can't really do very much for you, and has led to mass dissatisfaction. So what you've seen in the past couple of years has been these kind of new formations, right? From things like the Corbyn movement to things like Mélenchon in France, to the Bernie Sanders movement, which tried to sort of from the top down reorganize and reactivate a base. But the problem is that even for those attempts, which were generally done by people with good intentions. Um, the ability to sort of mobilize and motivate society is very limited. I mean, we saw how far that could get us. So even with like populism, right, which is supposed to be a new tactic, a new strategy to sort of deal with the neoliberal political system that we have to sort of re-involve the people in politics. You saw how limited that is because of the fact that society has been massively depoliticized over the past few decades, right? This is a fundamental fact of American politics and a lot of Western European politics as well, is that people are very, very demobilized politically. So you can speak for the people, you can speak of the people, but you can't speak with the people, right? You can't be rooted in these kind of classes. This is one of the fundamental hurdles that the left certainly has, and you even see it on the right. Certainly doesn't have the ability to do that, and neither does the Democratic Party in the United States have the ability to do that. The Democratic Party's strategy right now is effectively, let's stop the right, let's stop the right, let's stop the right, and that only gets you so far, right? And as we've seen, despite a lot of warnings to them that this was going to happen. You've seen this in the continued class de-alignment in the United States. But the thing is, and this is an important thing for Marxists and socialists to be able to do, and they should always sort of have this reflection, is to remember that like this isn't just an American phenomenon, class de-alignment, right? Where people who traditionally might have voted in the Democratic Party might be voting for the Republican Party or not voting at all. This is called class de-alignment, right? People not feeling that they have the ability to influence politics, people not feeling like these politicians represent them. And without a viable avenue, a viable alternative for them, I mean, people go to the right or they fall out of politics completely, right? So, like, what we're sort of seeing right now is the wreckage of a purposeful project by labor, by the Democratic Party, by the old parties of the left in Europe to depoliticize those movements, because those movements were a threat to those parties, because when they moved in the 80s and 90s and 2000s to basically just being friends of capital, right? Basically just being friends of industry, basically just being watered down versions of the right wing. Well, what's the biggest threat there? Well, the biggest threat to you is no longer the right, it's no longer capital. It is your base, right? If these people start demanding more, if these people start demanding that we do things for them, then our entire system is threatened. So what do? Well, you demobilize your base, right? Because you don't want them to have influence on politics, and you certainly don't want them to have influence in your party. And then what happens later is then your party becomes decrepit, it declines in its sway, it loses its base, and then you try to revive that later. Particularly with people like Biden, with people like Starmer now in the UK. And you can't do that after basically, for decades and decades and decades, demobilizing people, betraying them. I mean, this is a fundamental fact of politics in general, and it's a huge hurdle for the left, right, which never was in control of those systems or those parties. The closest we ever had to like a party being taken over, like a traditional old left party, was the Labor Party. And look what happened within that. While they increased the base, right, they increased membership with people, they try to open up democracy. All of the key positions, all of the influential organs were controlled by the Blairites, were controlled by the neoliberal order. So what did they do? Well, they try to weaken, stop, and harm um, you know, Corbyn's proposals. They tried to prevent him from being able to. Um, they literally worked against him in the election. They were sabotaging the campaign at the very heights within the Labor Party, because the threat of a Labor Party that actually had a labor base, or actually had a Democratic base in the sense of people being able to influence, was a threat to them. And they were successful at outmaneuvering the Corbyn left. The Corbyn left, is imploded upon itself. Corbyn has been slandered and attacked. This is the grim reality of politics right now. Um, our good friend in Australia says the UAW are terrorists. Look at what this stress is doing to Jim's hairline, Bubba. It's terrible. Feel bad for that. All right, let's see. Um, Custodial artist says, does Marx's work well in audiobook form? I mean, I would imagine if that's something that works for you, that's Matt's thing. I can't do audiobooks at all, but Matt listens to all those things via audiobooks, so I think so. Um, and what if the reverse Kramer applies to strikes? I'm not sure if I know what you mean there. Adam says, is voting for Dr. West going to be dangerous? Will he spoil it like Nader did? I personally, I don't believe, I've never really believed in the spoiler argument. I think that if the Democratic Party can't win votes, that's on them. I think that people should do what they want to do and what they think is right. We don't have an institutional organization, as I've said many times, that could actually deliver. For example, like if I came out here and said, "You do this or you do that," it's like, well, I'm just talking to some, people who listen to my program, and times that by 100, and that's just a bunch of other people with their own opinions making ideas and arguments. Right? It's politics. That's how it is now. But for it actually to be like an interesting strategic question for me, we would have to have an organization that had 10% of the vote or something like that, right? Or 5% of the vote, if we want to be modest. And then we make strategic decisions like, oh, this block is going to vote for the lesser of two evils to stop Trump from getting in, or the opposite, we're going to withhold our vote and vote for a Cornel West to demand that we get these kind of concessions, or say this is our red line. If you cross it, we won't support you. But until we get there, it's just a bunch of individual people making individual choices. So I think, you can really spend a lot of time twisting yourself into a pretzel to make those kind of decisions. The unfortunate thing, right now is it doesn't seem like the West campaign is going to have like the kind of political legs that it would need to be a kind of viable alternative. So, when it comes down to West, it's like West is for me, it's an easy decision to vote for Cornel West in Texas, right? Sort of doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. But I'm also not one of these people who's like genuinely like excited, like I think something is going to come out of that, because I don't think that that's the kind of path that is going to be the most viable for building up a socialist movement at this point. Unfortunately, I wish it were that easy. What's my faction? Your faction has been supporting this retreat with your support of the Democrats. No, when have I ever supported the Democrats? You can't just make things up about me, man. What is my faction either? I don't know what you mean. But appreciate your perspective and participation. All right, let's see. Marcos says, "Did you see AOC is visiting South America and first stop is meeting with Lula and attending the climate summit? I think we need to figure out how to pass a Green New Deal or similar here." Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, if you can get that group to have a little bit more international coordination, I think it's a great thing, particularly with Lula's kind of brave stance. On pushing for diplomacy regarding like the war in Ukraine, for example. It's a good thing for AOC to be spending time with a leader like Lula. I think we need to figure out how to pass a Green New Deal or similar here in the United States. I mean, that's the big goal, right? I think the thing that's really tough is that we don't really have that political engine right now behind it. Our best shot had been the Bernie Sanders 2020 campaign. That's kaput. And unless things change dramatically in the next 6 months, I don't think that we'll have a congressional majority for that kind of thing. So where does the answer lie? Well, it lies in the same kind of thing that it's always lived in, which is we really need to work and continue supporting and revitalizing the labor movement, right? That's why we're going so hard on what has been happening with the Teamsters. That's why we're going so hard in support of the UAW. That's why we're supporting the coal miner strike in Bessemer, Alabama. Because I think that the only thing that will be able to push at this level at the speed that we need will be a bolder, stronger, and more militant labor movement, right? So that's sort of, if that is like the thing that's at the top of your head, a Green New Deal kind of policy, something like that. It's going to have to go through labor at this point, and hopefully can build out from that. Daredevil says has a good point here. I think generally, um, I don't think popularism is an issue, unless I was missing that as a there's a debate going on about that. Popular issues don't stop progress. It's channeling that into energy and action. Agreement on ideas is step one. Organize to inspire popularity too. I mean, I think the last bit, I 100% agree with you. Agreement on ideas is step one. Organize to inspire popularity too, right? This is like one of the big challenges right now. Well, the things that like the short program, the small program, right, which is something I think we really should be bringing back and publicizing more as a socialist movement. This used to be the old school kind of Marxist party strategies that you have minimum and maximum goals, right? Minimum goals were things like an 8-hour workday, were things like minimum wage increases, were things like workers' protections, things that we want right now that are right here on the political horizon that we will fight to support. If you like elect this movement, if you support this movement, these are things we're going to fight for. But also, here are our maximum goals. Like we want nationalization of the oil industry, right? We want a Green New Deal. We want all these kind of big, class struggle demands, and being able to hold these two things, like this is our small program or minimum program and this is our maximum program, and being able to operate in that space where we know that some things are going to take a lot of organizing, a lot of fight to win. There are some things that are available to us right now, so we're going to be pushing for them. That's an old socialist tradition thing I think we should be bringing back. Popularism, I mean, if I don't know if you mean it in the sense that a lot of people do, which popularism sort of means like you're just following the polls on issues. I don't know if that's a good strategy for the left. You have to be able to recognize what ideas are popular and what ideas are not. But if you're not trying to drive political consciousness, political movements forward, then I don't think you're doing your job as a socialist, right? I think the kind of way to conceptualize this is that the socialist movement should be two steps in their demands, two steps ahead of the base of the masses, but never five. Right. And what that means, you can put in whatever numbers you want there. But basically, the idea is like, no, we should be pushing things forward. We should be saying things, even if they aren't, where the political discourse is right now. Think about things like that have had a lot of mobilization in the past couple of years, like eradicating the Supreme Court, or if not that, like severely limiting its power. There is much more appetite for that than there was a few years ago, right? And the socialist movement right now needs to continue to agitate on that, to continue to make that into a winning working class issue that most people understand. If you just say, well, most people think that this is a crazy idea, and you don't advocate for these kind of things because of that, then you're not doing political strategy. You're tailing, which is a bad thing to do as a movement. Mario says, don't know if you answered this before. And I'm not on Twitter, but Dave, did you see the bar movement? Did you like it? I've not seen it. I don't think I'm going to be seeing it um, very soon, but I've heard from people that it was a lot of fun. It's probably all I'll be able to say on that. Civil disobedience says, I'm starting to think Elon destroying Twitter might end up being a good thing for the left because it promotes grass touching. I think that wouldn't be so wrong. I think a lot of these kind of fights and weird ideas that people get really into, you know, I think that it'd probably help out for some people who spend a little bit too much time on there. But I mean, I think this is also one of those things where sometimes the call's coming from within the house, because if you spend time in left organizations, right, there's always going to be the kind of eccentric kind of unserious lefty stuff sort of comes with being a leftist sometimes. But it's so much less than what you see on Twitter, right? It still exists, but it's mediated a lot. So sometimes, we can overemphasize like the online left and that stuff too much, I think. All right, let's see. I can maybe take a few more questions. I'm a little bit behind you all, so get them in and I'll try to answer a couple of them. This is a good point from Daniel. Says people see the free market will fix healthcare is ineffective messaging when signaling to the left. What will it take for those same people to recognize that that also doesn't work regarding climate action? I mean, the thing is that there is a whole industry of people out there in like the left progressive world whose job for the past few years has been to sort of say like, you know what, Biden wasn't my guy, but he's been very surprising and really great as a president. Yeah, and I mean, you're 100% right that there's a contradiction from somebody who might think that free market healthcare doesn't work, but also is like, oh, the IRA just sort of giving subsidies and um tax breaks to the wealthy to maybe beg them and hope that they invest in um in climate change reduction technologies or processes doesn't make a lot of sense. And I mean, this is like the big thing with a lot of these kind of rhetorical arguments that we have. It's like, we have a little bit of a left media, but we're not reaching as many people as we need to be meeting. And I think even more importantly, our left organizations aren't able to meet as many people as we need to. It's a tough thing to figure out how to get out of this, but a lot of the symptoms and the weird things that we see come from that. Bryce says the next election is sad, but in 2028, Newsome, Pritzker, and Whitmer may run. Given the state of the right, though not leftist, I think they're strong enough to seriously damage the right. Thoughts? I don't know. I don't think so. I think that it's important for the left not to pony up behind any of these characters. I mean, I think the Bernie standard is sort of it. In my opinion, is that the left, and by the left I mean socialists. Like, if somebody's not a socialist, it's hard for me to support them. And I don't think that we're going to open up new doors by supporting nicer capitalism candidates. I think we need to be building our own bench and building power from there. Also, by the way, later tonight, you guys should watch. Sean Fain is going to be chatting with Bernie Sanders on Facebook Live. I'll definitely be tuning in. I'm looking forward to seeing Fain and Bernie together. Bush won Florida because Nader campaigned there, huh? Is that what happened, or did the Supreme Court steal the election for Bush, and the Democratic Party were too chicken to fight back? Is Kanye West running again? I haven't even kept up with that. And I mean, good to hear from you, Dylan. Well, I've heard from you a few times today, but this is like an important point. It's like the Left-Wing Party in Australia came into power last year on the Biden Starmer route and are now unable to enthuse voters for upcoming Indigenous referendum. It's a losing strategy, even with wins. And like, this is the thing with spending a lot of time trying to be like the outer ring of the Democratic Party or the center left or anything like that, is that it doesn't get you out of this crisis. This is just going to continue forever and ever and ever. Which is why I don't spend a lot of time getting worked up about, oh, are you voting for Biden in a presidential election? Because look, we face extreme threats from the right wing. I agree with that argument. Um, but this doesn't get you out of it. In fact, it just perpetuates it for longer and longer and longer. And yeah, the work that we have to do isn't something that you get to just sort of make happen out of whole cloth in the last couple of weeks of a presidential election. Is a much more long-term movement and strategy. And I think over fixating on it like the left does and a shitload of progressive media does, just sort of being the gatekeepers. Oh, we're the gatekeepers of, like, you're an acceptable leftist, right? If you don't, if you sort of fall in line at the end, right? I'm not saying that doing that is necessarily wrong or anything like that. I'm ambivalent about it, and I'm sorry, it's not good for subs, because really raging one way or the other on that is good business if you run a political program. But the reality is that you're never going to put that monster away. In the same way that all those people who showed up for Hillary Clinton in 2016 did that, all those people who showed up for Joe Biden in 2020 and did that, and then all these people in 2024 who will do the same thing. You don't put the monster away with that. The only thing that's going to be able to put that away is if you don't allow the right to be able to pick up support from, like, working class communities or communities of color, as Republican support, particularly Trump support, is growing. Still a minority in those communities, but it's growing because the Democratic Party is very, very happy and complacent with just trying to pick up disgusted upper middle class suburbanites outside of major cities in the South. Right, that's their strategy right now, and they're very happy to lose working class communities in Minnesota, working class communities in Texas, working class communities in Pennsylvania. Right, this is an ongoing crisis that you're not going to be able to put to bed with any of this kind of stuff. So the fact that so much of the progressive left, and even to a smaller extent, but still there, like so much of the socialist left, spend so much of their time warring with each other about who you're going to support in a presidential election when we have very little sway or influence, is such a disaster strategically, in my opinion. The work is difficult and it's not sexy, and there's no easy answer. But thinking that you can just sort of put the monster away by sort of harassing everyone in your movement to sort of line up behind somebody like Joe Biden, who is allowing the terror at the border to continue, who is allowing the climate crisis to worsen, who is allowing economic inequality to worsen, who's not fighting despite all the arguments about him being the most pro labor president in history, not fighting for organized labor in this country, right? That just prolongs this kind of crisis. And it becomes a really bad thing for the left, where if people are more and more dissatisfied with the Democrats, when people might finally be ready to break from them and maybe support more radical options, join radical organizations. Well, if those radical organizations have been spending the past decade sort of like one foot in, one foot out, saying we don't support them, but we're also saying you should do this, it makes it a harder argument later to sort of win those people into a radical alternative or radical movement. And that's sort of where we're at and what the left has fallen into over the past few years. And, a lot of my comrades don't agree with me on this. I'm not like a guy who's saying, go vote green, save the country, go vote third party, you're going to do something. I'm saying that, like, literally it's a non-question for me. What you're doing in that moment does not matter until we start building those institutions and movements that can actually effectively play a role in national politics. And I just think that it's not a place that we should be spending our time at all in, until we can sort of build up that base and movement. Hmm. Left Mech has a good question. It's like, in the absence of a stronger movement, what's the best way to stay sane without just shutting off the news, so to speak? I mean, I think that the best thing you can do politically is to be able to get engaged on a local level and join a left organization. There's a lot of fights that you can get wins in, even if sort of nationally it seems really difficult to get those wins. It's happening all the time, all across the country. Left movements are being successful at winning tenant protections, at fighting against increased neoliberalization, fighting for workers' protections, things like that. That gives you some sustenance politically. But more importantly, look, I'm not a guru. I don't know how to, like, make your life better. If I knew, I'd be a happier guy too. But you also have to be able to compartmentalize and, like, be able to get out of this kind of stuff and be able to live and enjoy your life and spend time with friends and family in your community. And just not let yourself become over obsessed with politics, because it'll be a very, very miserable time for you if you don't aren't able to sort of develop an other aspect of your life. Mario says, how likely do you think war is with China? Republican advisor Elbridge Colby said in an interview with Der Spiegel today that the U.S. should withdraw support for Ukraine to prepare for it. I think that it's not something that is. I don't think it's happening or anything like that. But it's not as far fetched as it should be, right? And I think that people really need to pay attention, particularly with that's effectively all these people are like, oh well, the right's anti-war now, because they're doing this. Well, if you listen to the right, like what they're saying is exactly what you're just pointing out, is that the right is saying, like, it's not that war is bad or that American military intervention is bad. We're just doing it in the wrong arena. And that's something that should worry people, no doubt about it. Mario says, last thing. All right, we're getting a lot of Barbie in here. Mario says, last thing, Dave, you should see the Barbie movie. It's great. Sasha says, Griscom's in Austin, huh? Yep. That's where I am, and that's where I'm from. Sasha says, "Damn it, David, see the damn Barbie movie." Okay, I saw Oppenheimer last night. It was pretty fun. Always good cooking suggestions from our good friend, congressional baseball fan, who says, if folks are looking for cheaper meals that you can stretch for several meals, a pressure cooker is going to change your life. I make a really good birria de res in one, and it eats for days. I love that. I know if anyone's responding to anything directly that I'm saying, I'm way behind y'all. I'm gonna try to see if I can get to the bottom of the chat so I'm not missing anything. But sorry, I'm 10 minutes behind y'all on the chat. Because here, well, Rob says, why are we talking about building a party when the DNC is right there and our policy are what gets them votes? Shouldn't we just take it by putting our people in at the local level and building power? Well, one, I don't know if that's true, that our policy is what gets them votes. And two, look at what happened in Nevada, where you had DSA members um, and Bernie supporters take over the Nevada Democratic Party. Well, what happened? Harry Reid and the Democratic Party's institution basically created their own organization that was running counter to the state Democratic Party. So literally the argument that those people say, well, you shouldn't challenge the Democratic Party, we should just fight to take over it. You literally have an example in real time of just how antithetical that proposition is to the people with the money and the power within that party, right? Look, I'm like, people get really confused about this, and I'm not going to respond anymore to trolls who are really worked up about the Democratic Party because they see it as a spiritual question instead of a political tactical question. I 100% think that one of the most important things for the left and the socialist movement in this country right now is to build up a party-like structure. And what do I mean by that? Not in this like very, very simplistic way that most people think of what a party is, where it's a letter that's by your name when you run for office. No, a party is just like a union is. What is a union? A union is an organization of working class power on the shop floor. A party is an organization of working class power in the social and the political sphere, right? You need to have something like that if you want to build power. It is like the trick of socialism, right? It is something that has been needed in every movement that we've seen that's been successful throughout history, right? Does it need, for example, to have to be an official electoral party in the sense that it's registered with the state as a political party, and gets a letter by their name when they run for office? No, not necessarily. If the Democratic Party wants to run like a Slack ship where you can just fill out a form and you can get on the ballot and you don't have to deal with all that kind of stuff that goes into running a third party candidate or something like that, use it, right? I think if you use it, though, it needs to be really clear that we're using it and we're not part of that institution organization. So no money that's going to those candidates, no money that's going to that organization is going to help out Nancy Pelosi, is going to help out Joe Biden. And that hasn't been the case as strongly as it's needed to be in the past few years, for example, with like DSA strategy, right? So we have to be able to move beyond that. But this kind of ultra spiritual like fixation on the Democratic Party, which like, yes, if you join the Democratic Party, if you try to embed this movement in the Democratic Party, 100% it will be choked out and will die. Even if you're successful, for example, taking over state party, as we saw in Nevada, right? But if you don't have a materialist criticism of the Democratic Party, but instead have a spiritual one where no, the issue is not being embedded or being a part of or donating money to, donating time in, participating in, fighting for, all that kind of stuff in the Democratic Party. If that's not the stuff that you're worried about, and you're literally worried that, oh, somebody filled out a form and they put their name here so that we can have an easier time getting on the ballot, an easier time weighing an election, right? Then you're not talking strategically, you're talking spiritually, and whatever, man. Miss me with that. The fight is too serious at this point for people who just want to do fantasy politics, because because America has a system that is undemocratic. There is no doubt about that. We have a two-party system, not solely because, oh, all the people are sleepwalking and they don't understand that the system doesn't work for them. Literally, watch any kind of political movie. Fucking watch comedy. Everyone has been making this point about there is being two parties that aren't really that different, and you don't really have a choice in American democracy forever, right? That is true. And why? It's by design. It's a system that's set up to keep people, everyday people, from gaining power in the system, right? So if you can, for example, if you have the opportunity, like if you have nonpartisan elections like they do in Seattle, where you don't have to run as a Democrat, right? And you can run as an independent socialist and you can get on the ballot, and there is no kind of designation that makes people, everyday people who might not be as familiar with politics, might not be following politics as closely, make a prejudiced idea that like prejudge, right? In the sense of, oh, well, that's not a serious candidate, we can't vote third party or whatever, right? Run. If you are in a hyper partisan area, for example, where there is really just one party that runs, and you can run in that party and win an election and win power and win gains for people, and also be very clear to the public that, look, we're using the Democratic Party ballot access because it gets us on the ballot and we can win power for you. That's what we should be doing. Like that. The fixation on this kind of thing, I've always found to be really silly, because yes, the Democratic Party, everyone knows the cliche, the Democratic Party is where social movement go to die. Yeah, because a lot of times people think that they're going to get in there and they're going to change it and they're going to win it, and and that's going to happen. No, the Democratic Party takes over those kind of things. It has existed for a long time because it has been very effective at absorbing social movements, even ones that challenge its power, right? So what you do is you don't get engaged with them. But if you want to tactically run on their ballot line, there's no reason to get really worked up about that, frankly. So yeah, we have to be talking about building a party. And also, again, like even when you start talking about a party on that level, you're falling into this trap of not thinking like a socialist, and talking about politics in a kind of like pop way, right? Where the party is not a structure where you have membership that has influence over its elected officials, that can create a kind of party structure, has points of unity, has points of political strategy, acts in a block, right? One thing that's very frustrating right now about our congressional elected officials in the DSA is that they don't always vote together. A socialist party should be voting together, right? Because these people are not just representatives in the American political sense, but they are members of a organization or party or whatever you want to call it. I don't give a shit. That says, hey, this congressional vote that's coming up, this is what the membership thinks we should be doing in this, right? And there needs to be communication back and forth, right? Because people who are in elected office oftentimes do have an understanding of what's going on behind the scenes, and they might be able to say, like, hey, I know membership is saying this, but this is what's actually going on, and maybe you should consider this. But it should be something that's a dialogue. We don't have that right now. That's because we don't have a party structure right now. And that is what's missing, regardless of what your preferred strategy. If it's a pure break of running and start trying to build a political movement from the ground up, I think that's very unlikely. But also, if you are somebody who's like, oh, we should be putting these officials into office or whatever, and pushing them or mobilizing them, no, I don't think we can be doing that either. They need to be members of an organization, and they need to be answerable to that membership so that you can have a cohesive political movement, so that you can build power, instead of this kind of mess that we have with a bunch of different people with a bunch of different ideas, hoping that maybe one day we can all get together, right? That's just not how organizing works, and it's not how politics work. No, I Apris Ku says David never supported Democrats, never supported Bernie. Yeah, I support Bernie. I mean, if you want to make a non-material argument, then just do this silly stuff. Fine, but it's not really interesting. It's not getting us anywhere. We spend a lot of time talking about this happily, but if it's just this kind of stupid, I've just learned about politics for the first time and haven't really thought anything through. Just we can do. I don't want to be a part of another generation that just does a bunch of failed left attempts over and over and over. A bunch of new parties with new names, new websites, new logos, and also, like, there's also a point too when it comes to party building that, like, you also don't get the party until you get the class, right? Until you get the people, and it's one of those things that's a tension because you have to build those things together at the same time, right? A political movement and like the class, right? The working class, people who identify as working class, and to identify as working class means that I'm an anti-capitalist, means that I'm a socialist. You have to be able to do those two things at the same time. And for so long in the American left, there's been this fantasy that we're going to do the party before we can have before, and then the people, if you build it, they will come, right? To borrow the cliche line, right? No, unfortunately, it's even harder than just building up a party and hoping that you can get it off the ground. It's actually doing that kind of cognizant work of building up the class like they did in Cuba, like they've done in Bolivia, right? Like the Workers' Party did in Brazil. You have to be able to build those things in tandem with each other, and you can't do it. You can't do it backwards. And so all these people who consider themselves to be super radical, and they are part of tiny, tiny sects that change their party name every 10 years and just do this over and over and over again, that will never be successful because you have to really be embedded in the class movement. And I don't want to be doing this to just lose constantly, because I can't get over kind of I can't engage and think about strategic conversations about how to get out of this um, crisis that we're in. um okay, we got a question from Twitch. High Five Pizza says, Dave, I've tried to submit this a few times. Forgive me, this was covering the recent degrowth episode, but I missed that episode. I'm generally very sympathetic to the left pro-growth point of view that you've advocated on Left Reckoning, and it's a useful, optimistic corrective and counter to some of the extreme degrowth rhetoric. However, one sentiment that I find very compelling, um, that the degrowthers have on their side, is the notion that the planet has limited finite resources and a finite biological carrying capacity, which we are now at least bumping up against, if not exceeding. In an age of climate collapse and biodiversity loss, how can a pro-growth perspective respond to this intuitively powerful sentiment? Many thanks for your response. Well, thank you for the question. First of all, I will say, like, I'm not going to accept the degrowthers framing of like me necessarily, and my comrades and people who argue for socialist politics, right? The stuff a lot of people say that they are. I haven't changed my perspective on this. I've been a socialist for a long time. I continue to be one. They're the ones who have shifted into whatever it is that they're doing. So pro growth, I mean, I don't know. I'm not pro growth in the sense of like I just want to see GDP grow up. I am pro building out the productive capacity, so that we can not just meet but exceed people's needs to build a future of abundance, which has been the calling card of the socialist movement from the very beginning of it, right? What was Lenin's famous line? What is communism? You know what Lenin said communism was? Communism was Soviet power. And what he means by that is workers' councils, right? That's what Soviet means. Workers' councils power and electrification, right? Because at that time, Russia was an extremely underdeveloped country. So we're going to be utilizing this new technology to make people's life, and we're going to give people workers' democracy. That was the calling cry of like the Russian Revolution, of the Soviet Revolution, right? So this is old school stuff. It's not some new development, right? Um, but on the question of like the finite resources on a finite planet, I mean, well, what do you mean, right? There are some things that are finite, like oil, right? And I don't think we should be utilizing oil. But when we're talking about like the ability of the planet um, to sustain humanity, the idea that we're anywhere close, for example, to the end of the planetary resources is just not true. You know, you have to look at things in each of in each of their categories, right? Because things like water, things like food, these are things that are replenishable, right? So yes, there are some kind of metals and things like that that aren't replenishable, but the idea that we're running up at at the edge of those is just wrong. And I know why these kind of things work, because it seems that like, oh well, there's probably a bar of like how much stuff, right? If you think of it like a video game, right? Oh, we've used this much of our resources, we're out. That's not how things work. Look, a great example of this is because the thing is that when it comes to the resources on the planet, when it comes to sustaining human lives, these needs and things can shift and change. So a great example of this is wood, right? Particularly in Europe. So in Europe, most heating was done. A lot of production needed to use wood, right, for energy, for heat, for things like that. And Europe underwent this massive deforestation. Um, Going all the way up until the Industrial Revolution, when things like coal and then later oil were used to produce and sustain that society. Well, while people were very rightfully worried about how quickly we were going through the stock of wood and the deforestation that was happening in Europe, well, now that we, for example, fuel our society, heat our homes using a different technology that's not wood, a lot of these forests have grown back. And in fact, the forest rates in Europe are, if not at, higher than they were in the 1700s, right? So you can see how these things can shift, right? So something like, you know, and in particular when we have opportunities to power and heat our homes and use things like nuclear power, use things like solar, use things like wind, we do have the capacity to move off of things that, yeah, are pushing up against the literal CO2 limits that the atmosphere can maintain, right? So utilize a different technology, right? This is always something that comes up, right? This is this is why people talk about Malthusianism, right? Because Malthus, who was like a political economist, for people who aren't familiar what that means when people talk about it, he was very worried that the population was getting too big and they were going to run out of land. Well, why did he think that? Because to sustain life back then, you had to have much larger land use per person. And the idea that you could turn the entirety of Europe, for example, into a big farm, he was worried, oh, the population gets too big, we won't be able to sustain ourselves anymore. Well, that was wrong, like incredibly wrong. And not only that, but the solutions that this guy cooked up and the people who come after him cook up about that are very nasty, anti-human things. Population control, population limits, things of that nature, right? So yes, I don't advocate for saying like we're not going to pay attention to the effects of production. We're not going to pay attention to our resource use. We're going to be wasteful. I don't advocate for any of that stuff. I think we should be very cognizant of them. But when you get yourself into this mindset that we are running out, that there's no possibility to sustain life, it's true that if we don't you know, change our production, we are going to suffer immensely, right? That's the correct thing to be worked up about. But if you start to cook in your head, well, it's actually impossible, to deal with this crisis, instead of what we should actually be doing is like, oh, we need to be shifting production. We need to be shifting what resources we use. We need to be mindful of how we're producing and what we're producing and for what purpose, right? Then these questions don't become easy to solve. They're still massively difficult, right? Um, but when you start loading the deck with things that are just wrong like this, you get into these kind of fantasy politics that become really dangerous. Um, in my opinion, both politically in the sense that they're not very motivating and mobilizing for people, and also dangerous because you're basically foreclosing a better future, because you're not willing to do the work of trying to consider, okay, how can we limit our carbon production globally, right? These are the kind of things that, get missed when you start creating narratives that I don't find to be very reflective of reality. All right, I've gone on for a little bit. I know I'm way behind. I might try to jump through a couple of these a little bit faster than normal. So sorry if I don't get to your question, but um, went a little bit longer than I had intended to. Left Merch says, do you see any merit to organizations like SRA or John Brown Gun Club, or do you kind of lump those folks in with the sort of com block LARPer crowd? Look, I mean, if these communities give you purpose, and meaning in your life and community, I think they're great. I don't think that we're going to be able to like militia our way out of these things. And I don't even think that, I think maybe some folks in those groups think that, but I mean, like, for example, like the NRA is like an insane right-wing group, right? So having a place where people can learn gun safety and things like that, that's not controlled by the right, that's fine. That's good. But I think that sometimes people get. I do think that sometimes people don't grow up around weapons. Sometimes start to fetishize them later in life, and I think that can get really dangerous really quickly. All right. Sorry if I missed y'all. I'm gonna try to jump, see if I can maybe take 2 or 3 more. I'm just gonna be sort of doing them at random. Um, Apologize for not getting to everybody, but we went a little bit longer than we normally do. Okay. We get this a lot. I mean, I've had friends who've tried to do this. Would you run a GOP ticket with the goal of disruption? I mean, look, if it works, it works. I just don't see that. I think the Republican Party runs a much tighter ship. But look, if it works, man, you know, it'd be great to reclaim the radical Republican tradition of Lincoln and all those folks, but I just don't see it, unfortunately. Tommy says, I dream that structured socialism grows bottom up out of strong local communities, and it looks like a better Scorsese gangster movie, barbecues, weddings, funerals, etc. Yeah, I think part of neoliberal capitalism has been a war in the community. A lot of this has gone away. Degrowth is about shutting down corporate waste. Parking lot lights don't help the worker. Well, I don't know. Well, one, look, if degrowth was just, hey, let's build socialism and let's have an environmental consciousness while we do it, then we're in agreement. But no, degrowth is not about that. Degrowth, you look at some of the proposals, read a book like Half Earth Socialism and see what the proposals are. And it's much more than just, oh, we're going to do a little bit less waste in production. I mean, it's talking about a massive sustained decline in the lives of everyday people. And I think that it's bad. Parking lot lights don't help the worker. I don't know if that's true. I think having light at a facility is something that's important for safety. For first of all, I mean, these are things that, we did these things early on in human society, way before capitalism. Putting lights in public places so that people are safe. They don't get into danger. They're, not people lurking around hurting them. I don't know. I don't think that that's a good example. For example, I mean, there's things that are silly. Like, I don't think that stadiums should have their lights on all night, but these are marginal edge cases that they fixate on to try to get people to miss what they're actually talking about, which is a sustained decline. For example, in the amount of electricity that you're using. You know, okay. Let me see. Handsome head injury says, David, are we actually post scarcity, but within a system that creates artificial scarcity? Sorry if this is a dumb question. Um, so I think what you mean here is that, like, do we have the capacity for being post scarcity, but we live in a system that creates artificial scarcity? Well, capitalism has always done this. This is like one of the fundamental points that Marx makes, right? The very famous example being the Irish potato famine, right? While people are literally suffering and starving to death, food was being shipped from Ireland into England, right? And that was because of capitalism, because it was more profitable, right? So that's where you talk about artificial scarcity under capitalism. I think that, when it comes to scarcity in general, I mean, I think that there is an argument to say that, like, yeah, the suffering, the poverty of people globally and internally in countries like the United States is something that's created. I think to get to when it comes to the ecological crisis and climate change crisis, um, I mean, we don't have the infrastructure right now that's built up to be carbon free, right? But to your point, that's an artificial choice. Well, not, it's a choice, right, to not do that. We've had the capacity to sort of decarbonize for a long time, and that choice has been avoided by the people in power because there's a lot of money to be made in fossil fuels and oil, and there's less money to be made in renewables. So on that level, yeah, but I think that don't go thinking that we would just take power and we flip a switch. It's actually going to take a long time of build out of these kind of things, unfortunately, because of the people who've been in power. All right. MDR, because we're going to be doing this. It says, what's your approach to tackling the Communist Manifesto in your next reading series? And for folks who don't know, patreon.com/left reckoning, Matt and I are going to do the Communist Manifesto in our next Marx reading series. What do you think of treating it like a history book instead of like the Bible? Well, I don't think you should treat anything like that like the Bible, right? These are, ideas constructed by people, and you got to be able to engage with them and debate with them. Um, I don't think that treating it purely as a history book is correct because I don't think it's intended as that. I think that it's a pretty, powerful piece of theory, not even as developed as some of Marx's easier work. And it's obviously a piece that is very much triumphant. It's very much, try to lay things out very simply without full development. But I mean, for a lot of people, I mean, MDR, I mean, I know your knowledge of these things is great. It's something that, like, a lot of Marxists, like, don't even read the manifesto, right? Which is somewhat frustrating. And you see, when I see people describe themselves as Marxists, I usually don't know what their politics are until they start talking. Um, just because Marx sort of, well, a lot of people mean Marx is like, I'm very left wing, right? It's like, okay, well, that's a very broad group of people, right? A lot of people consider themselves to be left wing, who I would consider to be right wing, or pro capitalist. There's people who consider themselves to be left wing capitalists, right? So I think the goal with the Marx reading series is to really lay out some of the fundamental arguments about history and politics that Marx lays out there, with the hope that maybe people can develop from them, and maybe engage more with not just Marx but with a lot of other socialist and Marxist writers later. Okay, I think we might be at the end. Yeah, sorry, folks. I think that's going to be it for today. I appreciate everyone so much. Matt and I will be back this Sunday with a bonus episode for patrons. We'll be back on Tuesday with the main show. Hope that you have a good weekend. Take care, everybody. As always, feel free to reach out if there's anything that's on your mind. I appreciate all of y'all and see you soon. There we go.